60s that we actually were sort of, without knowing it, they were sort of like pushing cheese as an ingredient onto us because they didn't just cut back or like put more dairy stuff out there and lower the prices? That this was all part of their marketing system?
It's even more than that, because people were trying to do the right thing by their health. And cheese, saturated fat, got slipped back into their diet unknowingly in lots of ways. Because again, cheese, high in saturated fat, not very visible to you, especially when it's used in cooking. But the allure. I mean, food scientists talk about cheese in terms of mouth feel. That's that warm, gooey sensation you get when you bite into a toasted, melted sandwich. So they love it as an ingredient to increase the tastiness of their foods.
And why is that a bad thing?
Saturated fat. Cheese is now the number one source of saturated fat in the diet. Saturated fat is the type of fat that's linked to heart disease. And the other thing about cheese, though, which gets this notion of the processed food industry being between a rock and a hard place, you can't make low-fat cheese. They do. It generally tastes really bad. So
cardboard,
most of the
like
cheese,
cardboard.
There you go. Most of the cheese in the supermarket is not low-fat. It's regular fat cheese.
We have to go to salt. What is the selling power of salt?
They call it the flavor burst, and typically it's on the outside of snack foods especially. So salt is the first thing that hits your tongue. And just like sugar and fat, it interacts with your saliva and races up the neurological channel to the pleasure center of the brain, which encourages us to eat, because that we don't eat, we don't live. Eat more salty snacks. That's sort of what that says. And salt, of the three, is probably the most magical ingredient for the companies, because it's not just flavor. For them, it helps preserve the food so they can have it sit on the shelf for weeks or months at a time, the convenience factor. And it's really cheap. It allows them to avoid using more costly ingredients like fresh herbs and spices. And it masks some of the awful tastes that can creep into processed foods that are inherent to the processed food system. And I went to Kellogg to take a look at that phenomenon and ask the question, why can't you guys get rid of the salt and cut back? And they explained to me the reasons I mentioned, which is it's so important to them on all different levels. And they prepared for me special versions of their iconic products without any salt at all. Cheez-Its I could normally eat all day long, but without salt, they stuck to the roof of my mouth. I couldn't even swallow them. Frozen waffles lost their color and tasted like straw. The worst of all was cereal, which we tasted with some milk sloshing around the mouth. It tasted like metal. I actually had the thought that one of the fillings came out of my teeth and was like rattling around in there. It was metallic. And they explained to me again, that's one of the functions of salt, is to mask some of these off flavors that get into the laboratory-created foods.
Well, this book of yours is not really a food book. It's an investigative piece about the inner working of these massive food processors. And so as we talk about salt, sugar, and fat, you write about a high-powered meeting of the major food companies in the U.S. in 1999. What was the purpose of that meeting?
I was really lucky to come across a trove of internal confidential documents from the food industry, the kind of records they create that they think will never go public. And this meeting I discovered through looking at these documents. This was a 1999 gathering of CEOs of some of the largest food companies in North America. Very rare meeting, very private. They hardly ever get together like this. And as they sat there, one of their own, and this is the most amazing thing, a senior executive at Kraft, essentially laid at their feet the emerging obesity crisis and started ticking off all the ways that their products were responsible for obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure. He even made linkage to cancers, and pleaded with them to collectively get together and start doing things that could turn the corner on the obesity crisis before it got worse. And this was back in 1999. The result, of course, from his perspective, the meeting was a total disaster. The CEOs reacted defensively. They argued, hey, we're already being responsible both to consumers and to our shareholders. We offer low-fat, low-sugar, low-salt products if people really want those things. And the idea of getting together to maybe down-formulate our mainline products, I think to them that was just really scary. They saw lots of lost millions of dollars.
One exec actually famously said, I don't care about nutrition, I care about taste.
Well, he was actually paraphrasing the view of consumers from his perspective, which is a valid point. I mean, even those among us who really care about nutrition, we also care about taste. And it's so hard to walk into the supermarket and limit yourself to the healthier foods because of the formulas that the companies have come up with. They're so irresistible and alluring. And I think that's the point that he was sort of getting at there too, which is, we just can't start making food without salt if nobody's going to buy it and it tastes bad. It's, again, this between a rock and a hard place.
But you have uncovered all sorts of documents that show that there's a really concerted effort on the part of the companies in their quest to make foods and sell foods to actually add those things to make the bliss points. You draw a connection to the cigarette industry.
Yeah, and there's actually a couple of connections to the cigarette industry that's so amazing. In fact, going back to that 1999 meeting, the Kraft official himself made a link to cigarettes in warning the companies that you're going to be in danger of losing the public trust, just like the tobacco companies have. But here's what happened. Starting in the 80s, Philip Morris, the largest tobacco company, became the largest food manufacturer in North America by acquiring the giant General Foods and then Kraft. And through the 90s, it did what you would expect of a tobacco company. It coaxed and urged its food division people to do everything they can to sell more products. But starting in the early 2000s, late 99, Philip Morris had a change of heart and policy on its own tobacco. It became the first tobacco company to embrace government regulation of tobacco. It was deeply concerned it was losing the public trust. And when that happened, it turned to its food division managers and started warning them that, hey guys, for you, salt, sugar, fat, and they named those three ingredients. And obesity, we think, could be as great, if not greater, problem for you moving forward. And I interviewed the former CEO of Philip Morris, who walked me through that incredible sort of moment.
Of all of the things you discovered in your research, what was the most surprising to you?
On a personal level, it was that many of these executives don't eat their own foods, especially when they run into health trouble. One scientist explained to me that when he blew out his knee and couldn't jog anymore, the first thing he did was to knock calories out of anything that he drank. He started drinking water because he knew that was such an easy way to get calories that don't alert the brain. And then he stopped eating my favorite, potato chips, because he's one of those people who can't stop with just one or even one serving. He would eat the whole bag. And so when he goes in the grocery store now, it's sort of a minefield for him that he avoids the most tempting things.
How complicit are we as a society in what the food companies have done to our food?
Well, we can go back to salt on that, because one of the other surprising things I learned is that, unlike sugar and fat, we are not born liking salt. It comes actually 6 months later, and there's been some recent research that shows that the processed food industry is hugely involved in shaping our attraction to salt. They grouped kids into two groups and looked at the kind of foods that they ate, and those who ate processed foods starting at 6 months were much more apt to be licking the salt shaker by the time they reach preschool. And at the same time, it's really easy for us to get off salt. Anybody on a low-sodium diet will tell you that after 6 weeks, they can't even shop in the grocery store anymore. Everything tastes too salty. So we're able to bring our level, our threshold for liking salt down. The companies are inexorably hooked on salt. They cannot, they're starting now to try to bring salt down in their products, but after 10 or 15 or 20%, they hit a wall where they really need the salt. So, yeah, I mean, I think to some extent, if you're looking at the solution, and I think one of the things that I hope this book can do is by showing everything that the food companies are throwing at us the second we walk into the grocery store, that can be hugely empowering. But I think that ultimately we have to sort of take that step and make food just a little bit bigger part of our lives and move from mindless eating to mindful shopping and eating.
Thanks for your work.
Oh, thank you for having me and your interest.
Michael Moss's new book is Salt, Sugar, Fat, How the Food Giants Hooked Us. And he was in our Toronto studio. You want to go ahead, try to go in that grocery store without reading the labels for salt, sugar, fat now. Our colleagues at CBC Television's Marketplace have been doing their own investigation into the salt we consume. Among other things, they've discovered that only about 6% of the salt we take in comes from that shaker. The rest comes from the processed foods we eat. Tom Harrington took a stroll through the grocery store with nutritionist and food labeling expert Alison Jorgens.
And how about a can of tomatoes?
You see there's 400 milligrams of sodium per half cup.
For half a cup?
Yeah, and I just want to show you, this is a half cup.
Right.
So this is not a big serving of these tomatoes.
Right.
If you were to add this can into a chili or into a soup, then you would be adding a considerable amount of sodium.
Yikes! Allison also says watch out for words such as less sodium.
This can of mushroom soup is 40% less sodium. If you flip the label over, it has 470 milligrams of sodium per half cup.
Almost a third of what you need. And when you start to add it all up...
And this product contains 410 milligrams of sodium per serving. And the serving size for this bread is 2 slices of bread.
Wow.
So if you put a processed meat in there, or some cheese,
Or
a
both.
condiment,
Right.
then it can skyrocket easily.
Here's how. Take the 2 slices of bread, add some mayo, a couple of slices of ham, 1 slice of cheese, and top it off with some greenery. You end up with a whopping 1,770 milligrams. Way too much.
Well, you can watch the Great Salt Shakedown tomorrow night on Marketplace, 8 p.m. on CBC Television, 8:30 in Newfoundland, parts of Labrador. Coming up next, we're checking in on everything you've had to say with our executive producer, Jen Moroz. This is The Current on CBC Radio 1.